a retired Air Force officer in New Mexico, a social worker in New Hampshire, a farmer in rural Brazil, a 10-year-old schoolgirl in Zimbabwe, a Navy fighter pilot over the Pacific. These people never met. They lived on different continents, in different decades, in different cultures. They had no access to each other's testimony. And yet, when asked what they saw, they described the same beings. Not similar, the same. Tonight, we examine the most uncomfortable question in ufology, not whether these beings exist, but why the descriptions match. And I want you to tell me in the comments, what explanation makes sense to you? The grey archetype appears across thousands of independent witness accounts. The features are remarkably specific. Height between 3 and 4 feet. Disproportionately large cranium relative to the body. Skin described as grey, sometimes with a slight blue or green tint. Enormous dark eyes, often described as almond-shaped or wraparound. A vestigial nose and mouth. Thin limbs. 3 or 4 elongated fingers. What makes this significant is the level of anatomical detail that remains consistent. Witnesses don't simply say they saw a small alien. They describe the same ratio of head to body, the same texture of skin, the same absence of visible ears, the same style of movement, fluid, almost gliding. Jesse Marcel described the Roswell beings in 1947. Betty Hill described her abductors in 1961. The children of the Ariel School described the beings they encountered in 1994. Separated by decades and continents, the physical descriptions are functionally identical. The second type appears almost as frequently, though it receives less mainstream attention. Witnesses describe tall humanoid beings, typically between 5'10" and 6'4", pale skin, light hair, usually described as blonde or white, strikingly symmetrical facial features, blue or light-coloured eyes. These beings are most commonly reported during contact experiences rather than abductions. Witnesses describe them as calm, communicative, and non-threatening. The term Nordic was coined by researchers to categorize these consistent descriptions. George Adamski reported contact with a Nordic type being in the California desert in 1952. Frank Strange's documented the Valiant Thor account at the Pentagon in 1957. Decades later, witnesses in Scandinavia, South America, and the United Kingdom describe beings with the same physical characteristics, without any knowledge of Adamski or strangers. Jacques Vallée spent 4 decades compiling a global database of contact accounts. What he found challenged the assumption that these descriptions were culturally transmitted. In cultures with no exposure to American science fiction, no access to Western media, and no tradition of the grey archetype, witnesses still describe the same beings. The Colares incidents in northern Brazil in 1977 involved dozens of witnesses in a remote fishing community. These were people with no television, no cinema, and no exposure to American UFO literature. They described small beings with large, dark eyes and grey skin. The Brazilian Air Force documented these accounts during Operation Saucer. In Zimbabwe, in 1994, 62 children between the ages of 6 and 12 described beings that matched the Grey Template precisely. Harvard psychiatrist John Mack interviewed the children individually. Their drawings, made independently, show the same proportions, the same eyes, the same features. Mack found no evidence of collusion or cultural contamination. The pattern extends to Japan, Russia, Australia, and sub-Saharan Africa. Vallée's conclusion was that whatever people were experiencing, it was not being transmitted through media. The descriptions preceded the cultural awareness. The conventional explanation is cultural contamination. The argument is straightforward. Once the grey image entered popular culture through film and television, it became the default template for what an alien looks like. Witnesses, whether consciously or unconsciously, draw from this shared imagery. It's a reasonable hypothesis. But it has a significant problem. The grey descriptions predate their appearance in popular culture. Betty Hill's detailed description in 1961 came before the grey archetype appeared in mainstream media. The Roswell witness accounts from 1947 describe the same beings decades before Close Encounters of the Third Kind or the X-Files. The cultural contamination theory also fails to explain why witnesses in isolated communities with no media access describe the same beings, and it does not explain the Nordics at all. Tall, blonde humanoids do not feature prominently in science fiction, yet they appear consistently across independent accounts worldwide. We are left with 3 possibilities. The first is extraordinary coincidence. that thousands of unconnected people across decades and continents independently invented the same detailed physical descriptions by chance. The second is a shared psychological mechanism that something in the human mind produces these specific images under certain conditions, though no such mechanism has been identified. The third is that these witnesses are describing something real. None of these explanations is comfortable, but the evidence demands engagement. When a pattern is this consistent, this global, and this resistant to conventional explanation, dismissing it is not skepticism, it is avoidance. The witnesses did not coordinate, they did not copy each other. They described what they experienced, and what they described is the same. The question is whether we are prepared to take that seriously. I think you are, or you wouldn't be here. Tell me which of those three explanations you lean towards. Comment below. I read everyone. Subscribe now and follow the evidence.